Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth, I believe, episode. Yes, the fourth episode of the Unofficial GamePass podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Odhrán Johnson. I am again joined by Connor.
Hello.
And this week we have a very special guest for us today. He's the creator of the Falconeer, which originally released back in the 11th of October in 2020 and has recently made its way to Game Pass just on the 4th of February. We are joined by Tomas Sala.
Hi.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you with us anyways, Thomas, and we really,
No
as we
problem.
mentioned before recording, we really appreciate you taking out your time. So we're going to be talking a bit about the Falconeer today. I think Connor might want to start us off anyways, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had this burning question ever since I started the Falconeer, Thomas, because as soon as I kind of went into that world, I was getting kind of all these different callbacks to different fantasy worlds that I'd previously been in. I was thinking of Lord of the Rings, of being like on the back of an eagle. It reminded me of this book called Windhaven by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle, where you have these. You had like a sect of people who were privileged enough to wear wings and like travel across different isles on this strange planet. And so I was thinking, I'm having all these kind of visions of fantasy books and stuff I've read before. I was thinking kind of what fantasy worlds do you like to get lost in, and kind of were you thinking of any as you were creating the world of the Earthsea?
I think if you play the game, there's so many callbacks. There really are. Even in the names of certain things, just little homages. I like I like Lord of the Rings because that's like sort of a baseline. Fair enough. I do also like things like Dune, which I read a lot of sci-fi. Actually, more sci-fi than fantasy normally. And I like my fantasy usually quite. I don't know if it's hard fantasy, but it's like, for instance, in the Falconeer, there's no explicit magic, and there's some spiritual blah blah going on, but there's no hand waving, fireball throwing, AD&D stuff. So when I read stuff, I like authors like. I always mispronounce his name because China Melville. Who's it's a pseudonym, and he writes really freaky fantasy, science fiction, and he's got a particular world that's sort of steampunk-ish, but it's weird, which I really enjoy. So I always like my fantasy to be a little bit different, and that's Let's see what's in the Falconeer. I forget so much
Because you've created such a wonderful kind of world where you have these kind of different settlements and they're all kind of linked and have different relationships, and I think it's fantastic to actually create so much storytelling in the environments and the actual just kind of map that you've created for the game.
I actually usually start with landscape, so I'll usually because that I sometimes say I'm the Bob Ross of game development because I do it by myself and I fuck around a lot and I just see what happens, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But I do like also landscape, so I usually start off with building a town or a city, and then I'll once I've sort of gotten a base of it, I usually have a little bit of an idea of what I want, what the hook is for a certain town or place, or what the emotion is I want to give. So I'll have a little idea, and then I'll just see where it goes, and then I'll sort of explore it. Like I visited it the first time, so I said, okay, I've made a little. Okay, I seem to sometimes I'll make a little. Oh, that's a little palace or a little palatial district, and I'll go. Okay, well then there needs to be a lower quarter district with poorer houses, and then there needs to be a harbor that's always a little bit more shitty. And then okay, let's have a military harbor as well that's more organized. So I usually go through there, sort of telling myself these little stories of how a town or settlement would work, which I just enjoy a lot making it and fiddling around with that. So that's usually a very natural process, and then sometimes there'll be some inspiration there, but sometimes I'll just fiddle what looks right, and then I'll sort of have to imagine how does this fit into the story. and I'll usually shoehorn it in somehow. And it's quite. I'm not. Well, you mentioned George R. R. Martin, who said that you have, when you're talking about rights, you have architects and you have gardeners. And an architect, which is the same, I guess, for games, is our classic view. People have a game development Bible and boards full of maps and structures and have everything mapped out. So if you'd walk into Naughty Dog Studios, you'd imagine there's like a room with whiteboards and everything's mapped out for their next game. I don't have that. And I don't eat any of that. I don't sketch out stuff. I'll just do stuff and then I'll see, okay, well, let's see where it goes. I throw away a lot that isn't right, so just make it as I go along.
Well, I think it's brilliant because you've got some really unique little environments. I mean, the moor, like I believe the scar or the trench in the sea, that's like such a unique thing to have in a world like normal people wouldn't think of. And I imagine, I don't know how that came about. It might have been just a strike of inspiration or passion, like, oh, this would look really cool or something.
Well, the thing is, I guess I'm like, so the more is interesting. So at some point, I'm making this world, and it's got some interesting features. And it's got an imperial city, and I had Dunkel as the first thing I did. So I know, well, there's going to be poor people and there's going to be richer people. So that's easy. That's just beginner stuff. And I'm flying around, and then with me, something will happen. I'll be milling over some themes, or I've woken up with a crazy idea. And for me, the theme was that, if you're flying away on a bird, that's all, that's if you go up in the sky, the music come in, and it's all, you're escaping. And the opposite of that is the fucking ocean is dark and evil, and it's, so I wanted to have something that was, that sort of make you dive into the ocean, so that there's dark places in the world where the bird has to go into an ocean. And I remember at one point thought maybe you should actually dive into the water. And some people ask this as well, so and then turn into a submarine or a manta ray or something. That's not hard sci-fi for me. That's too fanciful. That's too much, too Harry Potter. Let's put it like that. So I didn't dig, but the more I was flying around, I was getting lost a lot. So I had the map, but I had a hard time figuring out where everything is and localizing myself or positioning myself in the game space, because it is an ocean world. It can get very so I was just having a think, and I thought, okay, so that's something that's then going in my mind. I need something dark. I need someone to dive into the water. I need something that help navigate. And I go, and then something I need a trench run. I don't know if I saw Star Wars recently, or maybe I'd seen the new sequels, and I go, I need a trench run. I'm a flying game, and you need a trench run. So those things will sort of merge in my head. I need something on the map that is giant marker, which will tell you, hey, you're crossing the mall. So I must be either here or there, like a mountain range or something, but then inverted. I need a trench run, and I need some dark place where the ocean opens up. That's how the mall. I'll just wake up and go, okay, let's make a water canyon. Fuck it, and I'll make it. And that's how the mall was born. And it was such an interesting effect. And initially, I was going to make like that. There's an edge of the world where you can fall off. I might still make that, but this was actually more interesting. So I went with that, having this giant trench, and it's perfectly centered on the map, so that you have the South Mall and the North Mall, and it's a nice barrier in a game. So it has multiple layers or multiple purposes in the game.
I have to say, I love the missions that you do have to go in the mall. It feels very Death Star-esque.
Yeah, it should need more turrets.
I was gonna I was just going to ask because I'm very much when I first picked up the game, and my current routine at the moment is we're all still in COVID lockdown here in Ireland. I'm also doing my college degree on the side, so anytime I get as a bit of a rest, I'm kind of like going to a game that I can pick up and I can come back to, and I think the Falconeer does that so well. Because some games, you have to really get engrossed in and stick with it for hours on hours. But when I pick up the Falconeer, I can kind of go and fly and do a mission, or I can go and do one of the races or whatnot, and I can come back to it later, which I've loved so far. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, so when you get into combat situations in the Falconeer, there's this great sort of level of intensity, and there's brilliant mechanics which incorporate into dogfights in the sky and then taking out boats and whatnot. And then right after that, you're almost brought back to this really brilliant sort of time of relaxation for the player as they fly from one destination to the other. And it flows so seamlessly, and it's very hard for a lot of games to get that sort of stuff right. I was kind of wondering, was that always sort of at the top of your priority list when starting out with the game, or did it just happen to kind of fall into place?
Well, the game itself, it's quite a personal game. So for lots of things are things I do, symbolism which are personal to me or which are very representative of my personal history. So the fact that it is a dogfight or sort of inspired by Crimson Skies, because that genre of games when I grew up was my favorite game. So when you're doing a personal game, you got to go back to these things which are sort of important to me. And I've actually spent 8 hours today digging in the garden, so I'm actually quite tired. But normally I'm fairly high energy, and then I'll crash. So for me, it's quite natural to have these. Because the first time I made the demo, it had this serene quality. The first time flying around on a giant bird, it has this, a fear, a sort of a meditative quality to it. Nearly a trance if you get into it. So I love that, and then my brain after about 2 minutes of that goes boring. We need the epic stuff. So and then after the epic stuff, okay, I need to fly around again. So it's kind of schizophrenic, and it sort of fits what I like. And you make what you like or how you are, basically. When you do stuff by yourself, you do it. I made it that way because that's what I enjoyed, and then there's a limit to the amount of flying around feeling. Because people were going the first time they played the demo, they go, why don't you just make it a walking simulator with birds? The world's so interesting. Why do you even need the combat? Because then you're gonna go get yourself into trouble, basically. Because I personally, I think that would be boring in a way. So that it's sort of, I can't have that. I'm not into walking simulators, even though I appreciate them. It's not something I think I'd make. I do like a bit of exploding and a bit of action in between, all my contemplation and poetry or whatever. So it's something that came fairly naturally, and it's just being balanced on when I get bored. And so I think if you play the game, someone said I had an interview with your game, you're actually jumping into my mind. So you can see the missions, they go from boring, instant action, boring. I think, yeah. That is, I think a lot of the criticisms I've had is where not everybody is wired that way, I guess. Lots of people want to be, slowly immersed in something and have a nice build up. But yeah, okay, this is not that game.
I thought the game had a wonderful sense of the pacing. For me, really picked up in chapter 2, and like the intrigue as the factions kind of became more defined. I think it really kind of sped along, and I was like, oh, I really want to play more of this now. I think you've got like a great lineage of kind of dogfighting games from I think you've mentioned like Crimson Skies in previous interviews, and all those sort of old kind of retro flight combat games. I think that the mix between kind of that beautiful meditative gameplay and the combat, which can be quite stressful and quite quite anxiety inducing at some points, I think also plays into the story, and especially when you're fighting enemies and they're saying something, and then when you kill them, it cuts them off in their line. Like that sort of that feels brutal when you're doing that. It's like, oh, I feel kind of sad that I've cut someone off. I think that really plays beautifully into that idea that you don't know that you're the good guy for a lot of this game. And
But you aren't really, in any sense, the good guy throughout the game. It's always left open who are the good guys, because it's, the world and the factions are, there's no hero level story throughout the game. You're always a soldier doing a soldier's job, and that's sometimes unsavory or quite often. And whoever's on the other side of your weapon will have an opposite view, and they'll think of themselves as the hero, or at least not the bad guy. So it's a matter of perspective. So I thought it was interesting to make the story that you just like those old flying games, as World War II, where you swap the perspective of this campaign versus that campaign, and you jump into an actual person rather than some epic hero that goes from 0 to a level 20 death dealing flying god. There's still a little bit of OP once you fully upgraded, but the story doesn't reflect that. You're always the sap on the bird that has to do the thing, which I sort of like. It's sort of weird. It was an interesting experiment, let's put it that.
I think for me personally, I really sort of engaged with the Mansa Order, because I think the first time that you attack them and you go down into one of the caves, they're all built around this shrine, and you think, okay, well, they must value kind of the mythology of this world. And then the more you kind of get to know them, they've got this kind of sense of history, and especially when you become the Mansa Order, and you kind of get that sense of the other factions have broken their oaths or forgotten their history. I think the Mansa Order, I kind of go to that chapter and go, no, I want to be these guys. These guys seem cool to me.
I think I think the Mansa Order ultimately are more or less the good guys in the games, or at least they are bureaucratic shits in that they have so they sort of represent so there's a little bit of layering there, but if the Imperials represent sort of youthful energy, aggression, borderline fascism, but at least get things done no matter the consequences, and that's very appealing to a lot of people. And the Men's Order are more, I'd say they're, even though there's no proper religion in this world, and they are sort of a religion in that they've codified their history and their duty into a religious system for them, and that's I thought that'd be interesting, because that's something I dislike in the real world, because I'm not a religious person, and that can lead to horrible things, if you have too much dogma and stuff, and that's why everybody's mad at them, because they're slow and they're not explaining, and they've sort of lost the passion for what they're doing, but they're still doing it, still the right thing, but everybody's going, what the fuck, so I like that then nobody's really on top of their game in this game. They're all sort of trying to claw out of some shitty hole they've dug themselves in.
If you don't mind me asking this question, I think you described the game in quite a personal way, and I'd quite like to, because I'm really interested in kind of indie developers and one person creating a game. I remember watching, I don't know if you've seen the Indie Game movie, but that was a whole film about the creators of Braid, Fez, and Super Meat Boy, who these one or two developers working on a game, and kind of their really close relationship working every day on this game, and how how that gets in their heads, and kind of that process, that emotional relationship with a game. And I just really want to ask you kind of what was your relationship working on the Falconeer, and has that changed since release, or since it's come to Game Pass?
The first question is, well, it's something I needed to do, because I didn't want to work in teams anymore. I was in a business trying to be a leader, which I suck at, and had some mental health issues and a burnout. And this game was a sort of an escape from all that, into a more positive, I'm going to do it by myself, be at home. I had kids in the meantime, be a stay-at-home dad, make games. That felt very liberating. So that's a wonderful, that's the bird flying off basically. And then underneath this, the darkness of coming from a very dark place, a dark personal history, and the sacrifices or, let's say mental violence you sometimes have to do to extradite yourself from a situation you created yourself. And that is the darkness in the game, that is, that when you create something, for me, it's always fairly subconscious. I have to look at it myself and I go, okay, that's what I did this time. So for me, I'll always, I've been stuck in that because I'm 44. And I started on this game, 4 years ago, or this journey a little bit longer. That can be quite a long time before self-actualization happens, and you sort of figure out who the fuck you are and what's wrong with you or not wrong with you and how to deal with that. Then the game can be a way to deal with that or to process that in a way. So it's an escape. It's a fuck you from, fuck you. I'm doing it by myself, and fuck everybody that says I can't. Because you have to have sort of it's a self-destructive process making a game by yourself. It means a healthy process, and it is because you're going to pour. And I think that's the same for all those the people you mentioned, all those or anybody that makes a game by itself and says, well, I'll quit my business or I'll quit my day job and I'll pursue my passion. There's you do it at some point. You have to sacrifice everything you've got and take the risk. And the risk is, financial harm to your family, whatever, because you're going to start making something, spend 4 years of your life doing it, your life savings or whatever gets you through the day. And then in the end, it can be a big fat failure and you have nothing. And that is always, and that's actually more common than having a success, or even more common than, eking on by. So it is a sort of an act of desperation. So a leap of faith, if I put it positively. So that's what a game starts to represent, and that's why throughout the game, even when I still make something, it'll be things tied down or constrained, trying to escape. I made a turtle on Twitter for an expansion. And it's a town. People are living on top of the turtle, and they tied the turtle's flippers back to. I had no idea why I made it that way. I had to look at it and okay, it makes sense from a world perspective. It's a giant turtle. How are you going to control it? Make sure it doesn't die. Okay, you bind up its flippers with some ropes or some chain, and then I look at it like, fuck, you made another creature that's caught and wants to escape. It's like some sort of fucking. Idée fixe, the French say. It's this idea that's fixed in you that when you always return to drawing that when you're down or stressed or whatever. It's always the same thing. For me, that's apparently that, something that wants to break free. So that's the game is a very personal statement in that sense. I think that's why it connects with some people when like. To me, it's art. It's art because I say it's art. I have no other argument, but art can be, where you look at a painting or listen to some music and it sort of resonates. You can sort of you feel what the singer is singing or what the painter sort of means. It sort of resonates with a moment in your brain where you go, okay, whoa, this is depicting what I'm feeling. It might not be what the painter imagined, but you have that sort of brief moment. Well, wow, that's intense, or this is intensely lonely, and that triggers, I like lonely. You see a lonely landscape and you can go, that's heavy. That is because that the Falconeer is filled with that, I think. Or is it? It's for some people that works. They'll play it and they'll go, there's something interesting here. And for other people, it doesn't. It falls flat. That is the risk of having an emotional charge that's not narrative, let's say, that's very personal. It's not a universal connection in a sense. So, how now with Game Pass? How does it feel now? So that's how it's felt up until 18 million people started playing, or started, a good percentage of that started experimenting with it, or shitting on it, or whatever, or liking it, loving it, hating it. I think it's that Game Pass so overwhelming. You get, and plus it's more or less done enough now. There's a patch coming, hopefully tomorrow. But the updates have slowed a bit while I work up to some new content. I can look at it with a little bit more distance, so it's less personal now for me. So,
I kind of wanted to ask, just because you touched on a load of like these personal chords as well that I identify with in a lot of ways, and obviously we've probably gone through completely different experiences. But with regards to art, and how it captures the human psyche in a sense as well, like games have kind of, at least for a while, people have tried to dismiss them as not being an artistic form, and everyone, whenever their first idea of kind of coming to games, it's the usual sort of Call of Duty or FIFA Soccer or whatever, and they're kind of like, oh well, these are just things for people to play or whatever. But it's games like like the Falconeer. There's another great one, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture as well, which is composed by Jessica Curry. It's a fantastic game as well for art wise. But one thing I kind of want to ask is, so like, obviously in my own time as well, I do a lot of production on media stuff, and my degree is centered in law and history, so it's very much kind of doing something completely outside of what I do in college. And during COVID especially, I found that as a great way to escape your own home when you couldn't go outside, in a sense, metaphorically, and to create content that maybe people would enjoy. One thing I always found when creating stuff, and obviously my stuff is in a much shorter time span to say the stuff you'd make, and definitely not on the same scale as well, but when you're making a piece of content, there's times in between where, say, something you've gone and done, the hard bulk of the work that needs to be done, and it's all about polishing at the end. And I always find myself, at times not wanting to do it and trying to step back, and I just kind of don't get the urge to do it. How do you kind of get through that sort of block of, like, say, if you're working on the Falconeer, and then you're kind of a bit like, oh, I don't really want to work on it today. How do you kind of push past that idea almost?
Yeah, so for me it's double, because with the ADD I get hyper focused, but I'll also get easily distracted. It becomes very hard to do repetitive tasks that don't have an immediate enjoyment or emotional result. So creating something is very attractive for me, because it'll keep, it looks good, it looks good, so it'll keep my attention for longer. And then when you have to make a system and it's all code or do bug fixing, and it's just basically going through a spreadsheet with issues, 40 pages long, it becomes quite daunting to put your mind to doing those last annoying bits. I have help. That's a very, I can do everything, but things like QA, or some things I can't do myself. So integrating it with, for instance, SDKs, a Microsoft SDK to make sure your cloud save works, I suck at that. So I'll ask someone, can you help me with the cloud save? Stefan, in this case, that all that work, or So there's tedious stuff which I simply can't do, and then there's the tedious stuff in the game I have to do. One part's just discipline. It's just over the years, pushing forward, just fucking doing it. Just sitting down, just going to your desk, sitting, I'm gonna start it, and then once you start, you'll get going. And sometimes, I've done a little bit. So that's one part. It's just discipline. I can't. It needs to be done. A deadline's great, Oh, there's a new console generation launch. I need to be a part of it. Let's finish it on time. It's a great motivator, especially if you have a family. We need to survive. I have no income. Let's make it a success. So that's a good motivator. But the thing I otherwise do is, when I'm in a creative process, I have to do something non-creative, non-enjoyable, whatever, which is part of that process. Finishing it, mixing it, montaging it. If you do media, I'll not stress about it, or I'll stress about. What I'll do is, if I find myself getting stuck, and I've learned to recognize when I'm going slow, I don't want to do it, I won't do it. But I'll do something else, which I always enjoy, which is making some content or an enemy or a new. So I'll fall back to something which is enjoyable and is still productive within the game. So I won't go off play games. So I haven't played many new games in the last 4 years. I think the last one was Breath of the Wild or The Witcher 3. I think Breath of the Wild. And then last December, I allowed myself to play Kingdom Come Deliverance. And that's about it. So I just have rules that I say, okay, no new games. So actually the Cyberpunk deadline was my deadline. So okay, I can play Cyberpunk when I'm done. And then we didn't, but okay, I'll play it eventually. But it's I'll go back to doing something I enjoy, which is still productive. So I'll find the enjoyable bits of what I need to do, and I'll make an extra bit of world. I think that's why the world is so expensive or so big with regards to the content density. I'll just make some new stuff. I'll figure out later what to do with it, but that's always useful, and I can go to bed. I've done something useful. I've not done all my fucking lists, but I've added to the game. And that, what happens when you do that, you'll get that little bit, I've done something good, and that will give you just another 30 minutes of doing something shitty. So to just sort of interweave the good with the bad until you get it done. That's the only thing I think I do that helps.
I think it's so brilliant to hear you talking about creating like different enemies and different kind of, even now creating new content for the game. It sounds like such a passion project. And when I think back to playing games as a kid, I always think, I would love to play a game where I hop in a spaceship and you could just fly up out of space and then back into the atmosphere. Or I'd love a game where you could play as a big robot taking down buildings. And it always seems to me that the games that really fulfill kind of my childhood fantasies, whether it be riding on a huge eagle or whatever, always seems to be these small indie passion projects which are so wonderful. And I was wondering that whether you thought that these huge studios that create AAA games are less willing to risk a really creative new premise or concept, and kind of why that is that it's actually the indie developers doing kind of way more interesting things in the industry.
Let me say, I think that most AAA studios are filled with talented people, just like me, who want to do crazy stuff and bend all the rules, or do something different. I think in the end, it's a double edged. There's multiple perspectives on this why it doesn't happen. So, for one, the financial success is always going to be limited. A game like the Falconeer, because I hate doing anything like anything else, and I hate explaining myself. It's a game that requires a little bit of patience to get into. Well, that's a killer, but it actually makes it more interesting further down the game, more satisfying that you spend an entire chapter that's a bit slow, and in chapter 2 you goes, and in chapter 3 goes, what the fuck? That is actually interesting, and that is unique in a sense because it's fucking anti-commercial. Because you're losing people along the way. I can see that happening. It's not super intentional, but and you're trying, to polish it away. But in the end, that's the nature of what you make. So if you want to make something experimental, but that's it. The Falconeer is the fun part is an air combat game. That's the universally, but that's not a universal genre. There's been no air combat arcade Crimson Skies type game since Crimson Skies. We've had some military flight sim stuff, which is fairly niche, but it's actually involved into fairly first-person shooter multiplayer online type games like Age of Tanks or whatever, World of Tanks and stuff like that. Their flying it's just not a deathmatch basically, or a battlefield type. So that genre of whatever it was that we had with narrative flying games, let's put it over air combat games, it turns out it's not very commercially viable. It's not super interesting because not everybody likes it. And especially nowadays, I can tell you that you can go to the user reviews, you see people that I don't get the controls for this game because they have no reference for it. It's not just inverted, but you have to aim by seeing where your tracer fire goes, and your reticle is basically useless. It's just showing you where the bird is pointed. It's not showing you where your shots are landing, which is different from, say, what you've been taught playing Battlefield or even flying Battlefield, which is much more a modern controls and everything. So there is a how do you call it? A conventional track in games, which games are conventional. This is the game you expect. You expect it to do it in a certain way, explain itself in a certain way, and the mechanics to work and the fun reward you in a certain way. That is where the money is. That's very simple. And if you break from convention, people have to, discover these games. They have to take it, even if they try them out, they have to sort of take off your hats and go, "What the fuck is this?" And not go, "What the fuck?" Go, "What the fuck? Interesting." Well, that is a fairly small percentage of people that do that. So it's to be super indie. It's of course we have Valheim and Hades and stuff, but that's just a small number of games that are that successful. There's 5 a year, and something like Hades is a studio that's been around for a lot of experience and a lot of great games before they did that. So they are, triple indie or whatever you are. They are a step above, and they've created that audience for that game, basically. So I'd say that so there's one is just sheer. You are going to cater to a smaller audience. If you have 300 people making a game, you cannot do that. Then you have to make it, so the commercial interests are such that if you want to make Cyberpunk, you have to make it that game that every gamer wants. Because it's, $1 billion production. So how are you going to make your money? You need to sell millions of games. That's fairly simple. Even though the creative talent there is fantastic, and they do within their studio the super original, innovative work. But that's you have a commercial interest, and otherwise your business is the studio is going to go out of business. And I think that lots of people would, I think, be careful what you wish for. Lots of gamers say, "I want more innovative single player experience that rock my socks and that perfect indie experience, but then with AAA." Be careful what you wish for, because I can guarantee you if a AAA studio starts doing that, people will hate it, or a large percentage of the people will hate it. So yeah, I think it's that's one side. It's just very impractical, and you need people like me or small studios to create your Valheim or your Hades or your super or your Celeste or something. To have these special, different, unique games, because they're willing just to do it by passion and take a risk. And sometimes that appeals to a lot of people, and fantastically in today's market, where there are 1 billion gamers or half a billion people nearly on Steam or whatever, 200 million or something, 250 million people audience, you might find the 10,000s of people willing to pay a small sum for your game that will allow you to be profitable, by the nature that you're not super expensive for the most. So I think that's one way of looking at. I think the other way is that might be that we do not appreciate that indie games are more innovative, but that's also underappreciating what some studios are doing in the AAA scene, which is super innovative as well. So I say all of game developers are filled with people who want to make innovative new things, tell new stories, and do so, the best way possible.
Just out of interest, can I just ask quickly, just out of interest, with regards to, say, flight-based combat games or whatever, do you think that there's sort of a growing resurgence of a market for them? Because, obviously, at least one aspect that comes to mind when I'm thinking of flight games in more recent memory is the initial Star Wars Battlefront 2 that came out. It was very much universally, scathed for a lot of its loot boxing and whatnot, but the large player base involved in that said that the aerial combat style in that was phenomenal, and it was probably one of their favorite parts of the game. And then more recently, we've seen the release of Star Wars Squadrons as well, which is obviously a very much an air-driven game or space-driven game, I suppose in this case. But do you kind of see there being a growing audience for games, like the Falconeer, like Star Wars Squadrons, that kind of aren't very much on the level of, say, like Flight Simulator, that they're too complex for some people to get into, but have a great sort of maybe entry level for those sorts of genres?
I think yes and no. So I can see lots of indie games are picking up because there's so much young people or people new to indie that make their first game, and they pick usually very trend-based genres.
Mm-hmm.
So last year if you just watch there's lots of really polished third-person action hack and slasher made by indie guys with fantastic mechanics. Before that, it was walking simulators. If I look on Twitter, I see a lot of flying games suddenly. Just like I see a little more racing games. So I think that's, yes, people are discovering that there are other genres and other, let's call it, gaming archetypes, other than platformers, first-person shooters, and third-person action games. And that flying itself is but you had Air, I think, with a little dash, or on another indie title that had a bird, was a non-violent game. And you had Flugel, which is also an indie game where you fly around. So I think flying has been written about a little bit, but if I look on Twitter, I see more flying games. And on the Game Awards show a couple of months ago, they had a promo for a dragon deathmatchy multiplayer flying game, which I looked at quite a bit. It looked interesting visually, but for me the controls were mouse-based, so you could see that you're moving about the cursor, and then the dragon would follow your cursor, which sort of, as like Flight games is the FPS in the sky style gameplay I'm not a fan of. But I think there's a little bit of a resurgence. I don't think it will be a huge resurgence. I think Squadrons is great. I think the fact that Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous, which is also sort of a flying game, are making it popular again. And it's interesting because then Star Citizen is the FPS controls all the way.
Mm-hmm.
I get very obsessive about this, and Elite Dangerous is the flight pull back and to turn, turn and then pull back your plane's type. So interestingly, that is still, I think that is the only case I've heard of a developer actually going for that pull back to turn style craft control, which I love them to bits for because that's what I like. So I'd say yes, but I don't think it will be. You will see a huge resurgence of Dragon-like titles. It is a niche, and it's always been sort of a niche. But it's a niche that's been well and truly dead for a long time. I hope it comes back. I hope there's other indie games that do it better than the Falconeer or whatever. But let's see. I have no idea. Be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember the first time I think I played as something like a dragon in a game, and I actually had to message my dad and say, "Dad, what was that dragon game that you showed me years ago?" And it was something like Eye of the Dragon, which I haven't really heard anything about since. I looked up and might have not got the greatest reception, but I think it's so memorable when the first time you play a game where, oh my god, a game that allows me to do this. Or something. I think that for different genres of game to go in and out of fashion is probably quite natural, because there's always going to be someone who remembers, oh, I really loved that game back in the day, and I want to do something similar.
And the Falconeer is exactly that. I love that style of game. I had a look around. Nobody was doing it. I go, fuck it, I'll do it. And we'll see if anybody likes it, because those were the games I liked. I like a very specific way of flying and shooting and exploring worlds with airplanes. I would, do the mission and I fly around and fly through every nook and cranny of the very interesting worlds they had. So, or levels or whatever. So yeah, it's a fashion thing. I do believe it's interesting that there is with Falconeer, the interesting bit is people either love it or hate it. So if you go anywhere, it's like 0 stars, 5 stars. So it's like all the way. And you saw that in the professional reviews, that people go, "What the fuck is this?" It's always the same enemies and it's repetitive. That's the fucking genre, man. If you enter a Spitfire, you're always fighting Messerschmitts. You're not suddenly fighting these. But so there's these. But I think mostly it's people that like a certain style flying game and people that don't.
I think with a game like
I'd say
with a game like this, because obviously it was really disheartening for me because I left a 5-star review on the Xbox store, like seeing all the other reviews. It's like clearly a lot of people who just obviously it's not their type of game. It's clearly they didn't obviously give it enough of a try, or they were never going to like it, or and it's maybe one of those games that either you really get it, or why maybe that's a symptom of Game Pass.
I think it was bound to be that because there's such personal narrative in there. The style is sort of different. There's no textures. It looks different from other games, and for some people it looks simplistic and empty. I can't look at the game and have a feeling it's an empty game, but some people have that immediately. Think it's just an empty, boring fucking game. It's disheartening to read those. It's like, and then you read someone who goes. There's one review and there's I wake up with this game, I go to bed with it. It's like where you've sort of connected with someone. I think that's fine. There's an audience for this. And I think what lots of gamers who don't know what it is, who just go in and see, because I like it, I put a lot of explosions in my trailers and I make them look slick. I edit most of them myself. I think lots of people were expecting something different than that it is. And that's a critique I'll take seriously. Next game I make is to be more upfront that it's an artistic, experimental, style game that might not be what you expect. But lots of people just really want to play a fucking God of War style quality game flying on the backs of dragons. That's my take. And then they boot it up and it's an indie game and it does different things and it has something today. And there's this shaman lady popping up saying things that doesn't make any fucking sense. So I think people get very, I see that a lot. I'm so disappointed with this game. It's not, it's shit and whatever. And it's just people are disappointed that it's not what they expected it. So I do feel the game taps into a very universal need for some sort of game in this sphere. It's just not, Battlefield Squadron with dragons, which was, I guess, what lots of people are expecting. What you gonna do, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wondered because at the beginning of the game, it seems that the storytelling is very sort of minimalist, where you're put into this world and you kind of have to make the connections yourself and kind of seek out this mythology and the relationships between the factions. But actually, it's unfair to call the game minimalist in itself. I think because as you go on, the chapter missions kind of they really pick up and get really interesting. The different.
Yeah, well, I think today's gamers, and I am the same, so I don't blame it. We're all really spoiled with fantastic games that put fantastic set pieces. Ever wonder why the best set pieces sometimes happen in the first hour is to keep you in there. So it's going to be epic. I should have done that. I should have popped one of those temples in there in the first 15 seconds. Look, temple out of the water. Epic, mysterious, stay in the game. Didn't do that, but... I'll take the hit. But again, I think people have expectations, and then you don't fulfill. I like exactly what there was a French reviewer said. The Falconeer is fantastic if you bring your imagination. So he said it engages if you let it engage your imagination, and you start to fill in all the bits. It becomes a unique experience. And that is, that's quite a task for an industry where we're used to, you don't need your imagination. We're going to show you everything. It's going to be better than anything you can ever imagine. That's basically every board game or every boardroom meeting for a AAA title ever is, it's going to be, you can't even imagine how cool this is going to be. And the Falconeer doesn't do that. For me, it is interesting because I opened up all the chapters because that's how I would play. Presented with here's chapter 1, a prologue, or fine, it's a tutorial, and then there's different chapters, and they tell a little story about each location, and it's fairly background lore-ish, soft storytelling. I like that. I'm the guy when there's like I loved Dragon Age Origins, where they really had where they just had the text strips of the Origins. I think that's just Dragon Age 1. I read all of those. And I enjoyed that, and it didn't, I had no idea they were unique pathways or anything. Just the fact that, okay, tell me this little text-based story, and I'll enter the world from that perspective. That's truly role-playing. That is. I guess that is a very personal taste of the type of game you make, and enjoy in that sense, and it's okay, that's not super accessible. Let's call it that. So it's not the most accessible game. And then I hate making tutorials, which is sort of fuck. You're gonna get punished for that. So the tutorials are super minimal because why spend a fucking hour of my day making a tutorial explaining how the GUI works? We're gonna add fucking enemies or make another town or think of a cool myth or something. So that's just my priorities are always let people figure it out themselves, and I'll do it how it comes out. So I've made a promise to say my next game I'm not going to pick any genre. I'm gonna try and make something where everybody goes, what the fuck is this? How do I control this? And so there's just to make sure everybody starts at the same fucking level, and nobody can go, this is not how it's supposed to work, man. When you have a shooter, the reticle should move like this or whatever. I once spent, when you read all the reviews when it just came out, was the reticle is too slow, and then I read another review. The reticle is way too fast. It's super twitchy. What the fuck is the 5? And someone else said, it's so slow. It's everything slow, sluggish, boring combat. 5. And someone else said it's majestic. It's the best fucking air combat ever. 8. I go, it's like trying to please everybody. I'll just stop. I go, fuck it.
Can
and
I
then
ask?
You get the Falconeer.
Yeah. Can I just ask, because you were mentioning earlier about how some people when they first saw the game didn't really perceive it as maybe more of an art form and kind of just looked at it through the lens of say like, oh well, I want this to be an air combat shooter like that runs like this and how I think it should run. And it kind of brings up an interesting question, because I've since the last Game Awards, I've asked this question to pretty much anyone who's really big into games or who's either involved in the industry or just a really big fan of playing them. And obviously with Game of the Year nominations last year, we saw a game like Doom, which is very much gameplay focused. There's story there, but it's not really encouraged or whatnot. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum altogether, we have a game like The Last of Us, which is very much all narrative and what I would kind of describe as like a gameplay movie in a sense.
The prestige game, I think, is the term nowadays.
Okay. But so when you're kind of thinking in your head about a game of the year, what's more important to you? Is it the sort of getting across this story or this message that a company or an individual is trying to get across, or is it very much catering towards gameplay first, and then if story kind of comes along, that's a bonus? Or is there sort of this sort of middle ground between both?
I think people when they see me or talk to me, they expect me to be, the Falconeer is the game you made. This must be all, you have a very strict view of what. I enjoy Doom. I even go online. I have looked up the backstory of Doom because it's fun, and you got the Doom Slayer, and it's sort of weird. It's funny. I don't mind. Those games are fantastic. So I am not judgmental. Because I don't play 2D platforms, I can't appreciate it. And something like Ori will make me go, oh, maybe I should, get back into platforms. I don't know. So it's. I think there are so many different games. What is your personal? I think that's a lesson we should all, especially with user research people. If you don't like it, someone else might like it, and that's fine. So I don't mind that the games that come up are usually the best games or are great games. and you'll see exceptional games, something like the Banner Saga, which is a game I utterly love and adore. It's one of the few games that actually, made me have a little, not a cry, but go, that is critically acclaimed in many ways, because it was hugely original and fantastically executed. So no, I don't mind. No, I don't. Yeah, I'm sort of ambiguous on the thing. I'll read it and I'll be just like an average gamer, going, "Oh, is it good or not?" I don't own a PlayStation, so should I play The Last of Us? I don't know. I'll give it a shot one day, I guess. But it sounds interesting. I like the idea of God of War. It looks fantastic. So hell, let's go. So no, I don't think I'm not. I don't see I'm fine with the Falconeer not being game of the year. Let's put it like that. Yeah. It's not the be all or end all of game.
I think we're coming close to the end of our hour, so I think we'll do, if you're okay, we'll do 2 final questions, one from myself and one from Connor, if that's okay. Perfect. Connor, do you want to go first there? I know you were kind of looking to get into it.
No, you go first.
So one question, if I had to pick a final question to ask you, I think this is kind of an interesting aspect, particularly because you developed the game on your own. Is there one particular either mechanic or design of a character that you can remember back through the 4 years of development that you were really proud of when you had finished, or maybe there was one tweak you wanted to make the game that you were really happy with?
So there's 2. So the one is the rolling. Because most people go, it's just a strafe roll, but it's actually, if you use it with a stick, it's not Rocket League, but you can throw the bird around. The moment I added that to what was before that, sort of a fixed wing air combat game with birds, but then you could roll around and do 180s and stuff. And I wished I'd added more acrobatics in that than that there are. But that was a game changer. That changed the dynamic of the game. I didn't expect it to be that. Holy shit, I can do things differently now. So I can add to the genre, as it were. So that is something I'm quite proud of. It doesn't matter how well, once you get the whole hang of how that works, it becomes a different type of game to, let's say, Crimson Skies because of it. And the other one is, which I really, I'm ashamed of, I put it in that late, but I really do enjoy, is the guided rockets. So in the last update, I had guided rockets, and it's like a macro style swarm of rockets. It's just really fun. It's just hella fun. It solves all kinds of balancing issues, because if you keep it for things that were previously annoyingly hard, it now suddenly launch rockets, explode everything. It's fun. I like it.
Yeah, I love progressing in the Falconeer, getting those kind of those higher tier weapons where suddenly you're destroying all your enemies. You go from kind of hardly being able to touch anyone, and then quite brutally kind of shooting all these birds out of the sky. That was kind of a mixed feeling for me, because it's like, man, I want to feel epic, I want to feel like a badass, but also don't know if I'm the good guy. And I think that especially when we come to the end of the game, and this is kind of our spoiler episode where I want to kind of talk about the story at least a little bit, because there's a little bit of a revelation with the shaman each time you die, and you get the kind of cryptic the cryptic words and all these things, and some people might have not even noticed that she seems to be standing or talking in front of a body, and at the end it's sort of revealed that you are this recovering empress who has experienced all these memories through the splinters and has been revived. And I thought, actually, for a game where you've said many times, there are no heroes, it's such a hopeful ending, I thought. And for a game where it feels like you do go on the game because you want to feel free and you want to experience this beautiful world, there's a fantastic, beautiful sense of hope at the end, that this empress has been imbued with all these this wisdom from the splinters.
Yeah, I did like I do like that it's like the biggest fuck you to everybody. You gotta play through the entire fucking storyline to get a glimmer of fucking hope in the game and to understand what it's all about. I can watch the interesting. You watch streamers and people go, "What's the fucking splinters? Call it fucking credits. Why is it fucking splinters?" And people get frustrated. They don't understand, and then. If you finish the game, if you're one of the very lucky few, the stats are telling me that actually, once you end it, things are brought back into a sense of where they make sense, and it does become a personal narrative about a person. So it's a little reward at the end, and she is, she's the only one after the entire story that's truly free. Because she's been replaced. She has added wisdom, and she's free to do what she wants. She's no longer constrained by politics or dogma or things. So she's the only one that's walking off, like scot-free and literally free. So I did enjoy that, and that was the thing I've always known would be added. It was the first narrative thread that was there. It is a fairly minimal thread. All the way up to the end, and then I've had people on Discord go, "Okay, give me access to all the text because I need to understand it." Because if you see all the text the shaman gives you, and you all put it, she's explaining everything about the game in due time. You get all the hooks, and especially if you follow all the temples and stuff, it all there is a completely coherent, logical world underneath this. But it's fucking hidden, and you only get the reward of it. I enjoyed it. It's actually nice to hear that you had that sense of hope from it. And it is a little fuck you to everybody that doesn't play the game. I'm sorry. it's as a game developer, you're not supposed to do that because your ending should be epic, but it shouldn't be. You shouldn't take your heartstring moment and make it 30 seconds at the end of 8 hours of gameplay, because that's just bad marketing. Because I haven't seen any video on the internet of people streaming or showing the end sequences, for instance. And I thought that first that someone put online is the credit sequence and the complete end sequence. Look, it makes sense. The fucking game makes sense. Nobody's done it. Nobody's even streamed Chapter 4. So that's the super interesting part. So where I go, okay, next game, I will try to make sure there's some more interesting bits at the start. Because, I get sort of tired watching the prologue on streams. Going, it's the fucking prologue again. It's not even, by far the best bit of the game. It's I've cut off half in the next update. So tomorrow, everybody gets an update. Half the prologue is gone. It's just do a roll, do a dive here, shoot some things, and here, epic battle, done. No bombing, no balloons. Because you want people to progress through the game a little bit. But in the end, that's the story wraps up and it's got a nice ending. The ending is nice.
Yeah, wonderful. And before I lose you forever, Thomas, I do just want to ask if you can give us any hints as to what content may still be coming to the Falconeer.
Oh no, I've been quite open about it. So one of the things which I think is missing is it's a little bit of a pirate pathway. So a little bit what happens when you have that friendly fire, shoot at a trader and go rogue, as it were. There's nowhere to go at the moment. So there will be a pirate town and there will be a few pirate missions. Perhaps redeem yourself. We'll see. It's not set in stone, but there'll be some pirate content. Beyond that, I think the next update will be a little bit more smaller, story-esque side content. So things you can do in the world which aren't part of the main narrative. Mm-hmm. And they'll be a little bit on the edges of, a little bit outside of what we've seen so far. So there'll be new locations, a little bit new stories that fill in some of the blanks, and maybe lead into future things. Who knows?
Wonderful. That's really exciting.
I will just say I haven't gone into hiding. My camera is just cut off, so I am still here in spirit, of course. I want to say, Thomas, again, we're coming now to the end of the podcast, but it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You've given some fantastic insight, not only into the Falconeer, which Conor and I cannot recommend highly enough. I know it's on Game Pass, and we usually say this is a great deal to get it on Game Pass. But if you're going to get the game, I would even recommend, paying the €30 towards it, because this is worth a project investing in. We need to see more stuff like the Falconeer in the future as well, because there's not enough, fantastic indie developer games that, come to Game Pass, and we'd love to see more of them come along as well. So thank you so much, Thomas. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I will also say there's a very good value dragon DLC where you can fly as a dragon, which very much worth getting. But again, I'll echo that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Thomas. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I'll talk to you next time.